fog, see what I did there? See, too impressed with myself. How the fog do I get my exec team on board? Well, for those of you who don't know me, I can see lots of lovely familiar faces in the room. But for those of you who don't know me, as I said, I'm Paula Brockwell. I'm the founder and the lead psychologist at the Employee Experience Project. And our business really focuses on this idea of creating environments where people thrive and from that businesses prosper. And I think that is really important for us in terms of having that balanced conversation with senior leaders around helping them consider the type of business that they want to create, what that looks like, and how they the impact that they want to have on people and the world, but doing that in a context of the fact that most businesses have a commercial context. If they haven't got a commercial context, they've got some sort of delivery context and goals that they need to drive through. That's important. So it was a really purposeful piece for me to create our mission, not just on people thriving, which is what the core of it's about, but making sure that we really consider that idea of driving business success through people being happy, healthy, and connected at work. So that's the first thing that I would say. So to get into the conversation today, I'd love to hear from you what your biggest barriers to kind of exec involvement and culture change are. So if you want to share in the chat, or if anybody wants to talk to me, I'd love to hear your views. What's your thoughts? What are the things that you notice or the barriers that you experience around things? Anybody want to share? I would say it's not about this. It's not, no, I imagine none of you are saying it's because your execs are giant aubergines, really. There's normally a reason behind what's going on for them. For us, what we see, and so we recently did a survey. Thank you so much for those of you who contributed on this, but it kind of confirmed a lot of our experience around these elements, really, which was that exec engagement seems to be down to a few things, really. A lack of skills, so a lack of real sense of really being able to influence culture change. A lack of expectation that they've got to get involved in culture. They do the running of the business things and HR does all the other stuff. So, you know, a lack of expecting to do that. It kind of blew my mind, actually, that only a third of people thought they had to talk about change in general, never mind culture change on things. The echo chamber one, I think, is really interesting. So 73% of the people that we surveyed said that their exec never sought feedback from the rest of the business. And I think when we think about what goes on in businesses, in most businesses, there's this curation of communication that happens, isn't there? Execs sit up here and information is fed up to them to make them feel safe, to allow them to make decisions, and to allow them to drive through. And I think often our definition, this kind of stat, really typifies to me the fact that often our definition of the purpose of senior leaders is a bit out of whack. We think that it's their job to just set the vision, the direction, but then also have this weird kind of governance role that's about making sure that everybody's doing what they need to do. But actually, in truly high performance organizations, exec leaders' roles or senior leaders' roles is more about creating the conditions for other people to deliver great things and allow them to succeed. So if we're supporting, where we see really effective performance in organizations is where leaders are in service to the organizational mission and the organizational purpose and the ultimate goals that they're delivering. And they see their job as setting other people up to deliver what they need to. So frontline staff have more boots on the ground, more day-to-day impact on customers, on bottom line, etc. They're the people who make those kind of micro judgments that support the business to be successful or not ultimately and deliver on their goals. And so the fact that leaders aren't necessarily seeking feedback in the majority around how are they feeling, do they understand what they need to do, and are they set up to succeed, really indicates some of those risks that a lot of organizations have about recognizing that it's their role to really activate and engage the masses to make sure that they're delivering what's required. So that kind of idea of definition of what our role is, what our purpose and the impact that we should be having in the organisation is, can sometimes be a bit out of place. And I think this takes that into account. And we certainly see that a lot in culture, where exec teams are asking us to make them feel safe about the change. And we're kind of saying, it's not about you guys. You help set the tone of the culture, but where the ultimate behaviour shift is going to happen is with all of those masses of people that are working on the day-to-day roles that actually touch your customers and bring the cash in and make sure that customers, want to pay their bills or whatever it may be at the end. The final stat that I'm just going to talk to you about is, well, that such a small proportion of execs really believe that their behaviour influences culture, but also when they do feel like they're influencing culture, generally they think that their role is about just delegating tasks to others. So being able to recognise and understand that, I think, is massively important. So in terms of how we boil it down and what our experience suggests about this is there's a few different barriers that come into place. First of all, we see so often that senior leaders don't necessarily see the link between culture and performance. So they see culture as this ethereal thing that sits on the side and is a bit different to how we run the business. So it's all of the pizza days and things that we do to make people feel happy, really, rather than necessarily recognising that it's really about activating the right behaviour to make sure that the business delivers what it needs to in a sustainable and a high performance way. So we're going to talk a bit about how do we bridge that gap and support, demystify culture from this weird thing that is about just making people feel happy at all costs to actually being something about the tone in which we behave and how we run the business. Often what we find is that they're focused on their own frustrations with others. So so often when we talk to senior leaders about what their ideal culture is, basically what they do is just give us a list of things that pee them off and say, well, if people didn't do this anymore, it'd be great if they were just a bit more empowered, or they took a bit more responsibility, they didn't keep sending things up the line, etc., rather than really talking about what it is they need the business to feel like, to be like, and how they need people to behave moving forward. So they focus much more on the aches and what's frustrating them and what other people are doing without necessarily thinking about their own influence on the system. Often we see them really constrained by the current system as well. So they recognise that there is a change that's required, but often they kind of look at their teams and think, but do those people have the capability? I'm obsessed with this idea of delegated authority or empowerment. Often I'll talk to senior leaders about the desire to delegate or the desire to empower people more, but them feeling really constrained and stuck where they just don't feel that they've got the capability, the experience, or the mindset that they need within their teams to do that. So perhaps they try to do it, but they do it in a way that's more about dropping mic and just asking people to get on with it. It doesn't work, and then they pull control back. So they really feel stuck within the existing system and they don't know where to start, because typically what they're doing is thinking of an all or nothing scenario where everybody's empowered from not being empowered, rather than considering what the journey might be along the way. So I think a big chunk of our role is about supporting them to see where the wiggle room is within the existing and set systems, and really encouraging them to think about the small steps that they can take to break down the existing systems and start to build up into a new world. And the final thing that I would say, and I've just been in a coaching session talking to somebody about this, and they reflected that they'd kind of forgotten that their exec colleagues were pretty human as well, and maybe fear and personal drivers were within what was driving the dynamic that we were talking about. But recognising that even as senior leaders with lots of experience and lots of salary or whatever else might be going on, they are still human beings who might not have the skills that they need or the bravery that they need, or even just feel that they're a bit overwhelmed. And often they are stuck in that echo chamber where they are being given this curated version of the world and what people's experiences are that mean that they don't necessarily understand what's going on from a day-to-day basis. Do we feel sorry for our senior leaders yet? Just about, not quite. You don't look convinced, Kirsty. Let me just, somebody's just joining us on the entry. So we've got to take this into context, though, whenever we're thinking about how we engage people. So, I'm not asking you to get the violins out here. I think it's important for us, though, to consider the context that we're asking people to operate and engage within, and also really think about the narrative that we want to work against, I guess, to really move forward, because there are some unhelpful beliefs about culture, I think, within the world that make it really difficult for people to engage. So what I'd like to do is just spend some of this session today looking at each of these different areas and saying, well, how do we overcome this, and what might we be able to do to build a narrative, an understanding, and a partnership that allows us to move forward in a meaningful way. So first area that I'm going to talk to you about is this idea of linking culture to performance. Now, this for me has always been a bugbear, actually, in terms of really supporting organisations. I think often whenever we start to do culture inquiries or we think about defining our ideal culture for the future, we start with a question that is, how does it need to feel around here? Or how do people want it to feel around here? And we forget to always anchor that to what the business's core purpose is. So for us, whenever we're doing culture inquiries, we typically start with two questions. One is, what does the business need in terms of behaviour and tone of approach to succeed? What is it that it needs to drive its goals, its priorities, and the performance kind of metrics that it's driving forward to succeed? So first question is actually, what does the business need from a behaviour perspective in order to succeed? And the second question that we ask then is, what type of environment does our ideal talent need in order to display that behaviour? And in doing that, what we're doing is immediately shifting the conversation from just how do we make people happy into a context of recognising actually that people's experiences at work directly influence their behaviours, which is a thing that directly influences business results. So as we start to talk about ideal culture or expressed culture, we are focusing much more on this idea of understand the business results that are required, map back to the attitudes and behaviour that we need to make that happen. Think then about what does that mean in terms of the everyday experience that we need to create for colleagues? How do they need to feel? What do they need to see? What do they need to hear? And what do they need to believe about our business to really be able to demonstrate those attitudes and behaviours in a sustainable and effective way? And what does that mean then in terms of the cultural ecosystem that we need to create? And what I mean by cultural ecosystem, I'll share a bit more with you about in a moment. But what I mean there is, what is their experience of the business when they touch the different parts of the business, how their colleagues treat them, how their leaders treat them, how their managers treat them, how the systems and processes treat them, how they're backed whenever they talk to customers or partners, etc. What does that look like? What does that need to look like to drive those feelings and therefore funnel through? So often what we do, I think, in our culture inquiry work is we do a really great job of describing that culture, but we don't necessarily continue the equation through to what does that actually mean and why are we linking to that? And we don't have that conversation with the naysayers in our group of why it's important to make our people feel positive, that it's not about just dealing with the snowflakes or that's how we've got to do things these days, but recognizing that what we're trying to do is curate an experience that allows people to have the energy, the connection and the motivation to display the behaviors that we need to drive success forward. So we start this conversation really early by starting by having that conversation with the MD or the chief executive saying, what sort of business do you need this to be to succeed? How do you need people to be showing up? What is it that you need from them in terms of tone and type of behaviour to allow you to succeed with your goals? And what we're doing is breaking through that barrier of, well, I just need this many widgets built, or we just need to grow sales in this way, into, well, to grow sales, we need people to be in this mode. We need them to demonstrate this sort of behaviour. We believe in this so much that we've even built a free open source tool. So if you haven't come across it yet, we'll put it into the follow-up link from the session. But our EX index is designed to help you start to have those conversations with your exec. So it's a short kind of 3 to 5 minute tool where you just do it's looking at current culture, and it allows you to kind of use the sliding scale to identify where things are at the moment. And basically what the report does is it kind of feeds back to you this equation. It's saying your culture is probably like this from a, an autonomy or an accountability point of view. This is probably how it makes people feel. And this is the type of behavior that you're likely to be seeing. So I will often use that tool as a starting point when I'm going in to work with leadership teams to just say, just have a think about where things are at the moment. Do this tool, see if this resonates with you. But basically what I'm doing is quietly just introducing these links to them in terms of getting them to recognize that this type of culture, or these big words that we use around culture, are actually linked to this day-to-day behavior that you're experiencing, and will probably speak to some of the frustrations that are currently driving you about wanting to work around this. Does that make sense to people? Yeah, great. Okay. So I think if we really, the other thing I think that is a real barrier is this idea of the smokiness of really what drives culture. So again, I notice a lot that whenever businesses or consultancies are doing cultural inquiries, that there's this need to very clearly define exactly what culture is. And honestly, it's a difficult thing to do. And often I get asked the question, often as a distraction, to be honest, because the group doesn't want to do the work around, let's discuss what's going on in terms of the aches and difficulties on things. But people want to define exactly what is culture. Is it the behavior? Is it the feeling, etc.? Truthfully, for me, there are lots of research-based definitions on this, but in my experience, I find the most helpful way to talk about culture is as this interlocking self-reinforcing system, where if we wanted to measure it, we would look at the ideas, the beliefs, that people had about the organisation. We'd look at the customs and processes that are in place, and we'd also look at the behaviour. And that would allow us to get a good indication of what that culture is currently like, because it's a kind of output of the culture. But truthfully, it is this reinforcing cycle. So not only is that an output of the system, it's also an input to it as well. So it's our behaviours, our beliefs, our customs, experiences, our processes feed into and encourage that overall system and kind of habit to keep reinforcing. So what happens is that you get this really tight cycle of we're really kind of, I don't know, we're a really controlling organisation. So people believe that they can't make a choice. When they go to make a decision, they've got to go through 3 or 4 different decision-making panels, or it's got to go through 3 or 4 different layers of leadership for them to make that choice. So from a behaviour point of view, they never really make a recommendation. They just wait for it to go through that process and the decision to come down. And in doing that, they learn that actually that's the easiest way to get decisions made within the organisation. So that continues to work through. So if we want to influence culture, what we've got to start to do is disrupt that system and really try and break some of those feedback loops that are happening, change the flavour of them so that the outputs that we're getting from that system are changing on the way. So we've got to pick bits of the system to start to shift and influence so that we can change it overall. And in using this graphic, what I'll often do is talk to execs about culture almost being a soup that's already been cooked. So if we've already, we've got all of the ingredients together, it's been cooking for a while, everything's kind of melded together and meshed. If we want to shift our culture, what we can't really do, well, we can, but probably shouldn't do, is just chuck the soup out and stick a load of new ingredients in. That's not a particularly effective way to shift an organisation. We're stuck with what we have already, and what we've got to do is just start to put new flavours and ingredients in so that over time we're shifting the flavour profile within that, allowing it to cook together and meld until it turns into something that actually feels more palatable and more in line with where we want to go. So this is a slow shift that needs to happen. And I think often we find that senior leaders are in a place of it's annoying me, just fix it. And there might be some stuff that we can drive from a quick win perspective, but if we can get them to understand this system that they're operating within and support them to start to think about how we play with the ingredients a bit to shift the flavour, that can be a really helpful thing. So one of the ways that we start to do this is we've got a kind of questioning tool that we use to support around this. And I've just shared some of this. We've got a full kind of canvas that we share within our Culture Change Makers course on this, but I thought it would be nice to share with you some of the most popular questions that we see people use off this. But if you want to start to have that more business focused conversation with your senior leaders, you might want to ask them some of these questions. So talking to them about the core purpose and mission, where the business is going. And I don't mean that I really don't mean that from a kind of necessarily that kind of ethereal mission, purpose and values cascade that we often get to. Talking to them really about what is it that they want to achieve, what are your shareholders expecting, or what is it that the market suggests need to happen over the next year, what is it that their ambition is, what do they want to be known for at the end of their tenure. Really having that conversation can be helpful. Linking that into the business strategy and goals is really important. So what are the top priorities for the business in the next couple of years? What are the things that they have to stand up and be accountable for? So understanding that can really help you define a much more effective and clearer and what will feel like a current cultural definition, because you're talking to the things that are being talked about in operational lines and business management meetings all day, every day. I think there's some broader things that you can encourage as well. So talking about the employment market, what's going on within market trends to understand how the context might be shifting to influence the talent profile and the behaviour profile that you need moving forwards useful. But also I think some of these elements around where the burning platform might be. So if you've got shareholders or regulators, etc., understanding where the non-negotiables might be is helpful. One of the things that I notice is also a bit of stickiness, I guess, about the evolving nature of work and how we're ever increasingly finding that we've got people in the boardroom who think that the current deal of work of those coming into the workplace is one that's a bit softer or self-entitled, etc. When in fact, if we're having the conversation about war on talent, attraction of people, keeping people and getting them to their best, we've got to support our exec teams on understanding the need to meet people at where they're at and creating that balance deal that isn't about just trying to meet everyone's needs, but creating an environment that feels engaging and interesting enough that people want to bring their best and serve business requirements. So talking about colleagues' expectations of work within your talent areas and connecting to what that means from a recruitment and retention point of view can be really helpful, particularly if you've got some live pain points around that, around things. And then the typical element around the behavioural requirements that we need, as well as understanding and taking into account the sacred cows, I think is massively critical when you're starting to define this. But I find that hosting this conversation over time, both individually with your senior leadership team members, but particularly I think starting with your MD or chief exec, so that you can build an individual contract with them that's saying, right, let me help you do this. My job is to build the capability and infrastructure that allows this to happen within your organisation. My job is to partner with you to help you create the conditions within your own leadership team that allows this to flourish, is a really useful way to get things moving and allow you to create that real connection of business partnering within your business and create that business focus on the work that you're doing, really. Any questions about that, or does that seem reasonable to people? What's your thoughts? Thinking faces. Any comments or observations?
Hello, yeah, I've got a question if I may.
Oh, hi, Nancy. Yeah.
Yeah. Could you say a bit more about, or give us some examples about the sacred cows? I think that would be fascinating.
Yeah, so for me, this is the stuff, well, sacred cows are what they are, and the stuff that you can't touch really. So these are the things that might often they're kind of brand differentiators in the market, or things that our colleagues see as so absolutely sacrosanct that if we started to shift those, that we would just lose people in droves, really. So they're the things that are really critical to our core identity and our success to this point. So I'm working with a lot of organizations at the moment who are trying to reset their family feel into something that's more of a balanced deal of meeting business versus organizational needs. But one of the things that we have to ensure that we protect in all of those contexts is that sense of those businesses being great employers. So they may not want to be family businesses where cozy conversations are in place or difficult conversations aren't had or personal comfort is prioritized over performance. But what they've got to make sure is that they are seen still as a benevolent, a caring, a supportive employer, because if they don't, they will break the core psychological contract with their employees to such an extent that they won't be able to make choices about which talent they foster and support through that transformation, and where they might need to support attrition to move things through, really. So those are the deal breakers, really, either with your customers or your staff, that would take the choice around the transition out of your hands, because people would fundamentally see that you've broken a deal that you really want to keep on things. So it's important to remember those things, because as we start to meddle with the soup, I love that. I don't know why I'm obsessed with that analogy and I take it too far, but if we know we want a carrot soup, but we just want to change it from a bland one to a spicy one, then taking all the carrots out is going to ruin the process, really. So we've got to make sure that we remember the things that are core to our identity and our connection with our customers and our employees. Yeah. So next area to talk to you about then is just thinking about others' focusing on the idea of others' frustration. So I imagine, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, but I imagine that plenty of you have experienced this conversation where you go in to talk about culture, or you go in to talk about engagement, and your senior leaders just give you a list of all the annoying things that your team or the organization does that they think they shouldn't be doing anymore, and they don't mention anything that they're doing that might be unhelpful. So never happen. Is that just me? I just bring it out in people. Danny, I see your face there. I think you might have a shared experience. And I think, you know, I see this a lot. I think one of the reasons that I founded the Employee Experience Project is that I worked in some really big evidence-based consultancies over my career, and we would create amazing stories, amazing evidence, pulled together amazing bits of qualitative and quantitative evidence about what was going on within cultures. Like, we've nailed it this time, it is absolutely watertight, we're going to go in and we're going to get this leadership team to take this into account. And then they'd go, yeah, but what about this over here that these people are doing? So, you know, we'd be talking to them about their role, their responsibility, their influence on things, but actually they'd just be looking over the fence to what the issues were. And the truth is that culture is so multifaceted and so self-reinforcing that we could dead easily get ourselves caught in the waterfall and the kind of turbulent river of just bouncing about all the different factors that seem to drive things. So I made a really conscious decision as I built our methodology to say, I'm not having these conversations like this anymore, because it's too big, it's too weighty, and it's far too easy for people to say, yeah, I hear there's some stuff about me, but let's focus over here because this is more interesting. So what we did was we built the Culture Catalyst scorecard, which is based off a thematic analysis of over 50 culture inquiries that I'd done throughout my career on the things that we most regularly reported on that were driving culture moving forward, and a good chunk of kind of system and process considered in there as well, rather than just the traditional kind of behavioural side of things. But the intent was to get the cultural drivers, or the cultural ecosystem, as I grandly like to title it, onto one page, so that we could have a conversation that's saying, yes, all of these different factors are influencing and crashing together to influence how people are behaving and what you're seeing on a day-to-day basis, and how people are feeling. But let's look at them in one place so that we can see them beside each other and recognise that all of them are important, not just one. So what we do, and I'm happy for you to nick this and do as you wish with it, but what we do is we've got a kind of structured scorecard that sits behind this, a chunk of behavioural indicators that that we take all of the evidence from the culture inquiry against, and then we RAG rate the extent to which each of these different factors across the cultural ecosystem are currently aligned to the ideal. So what we're not saying here is from some theoretical model, you're just rubbish leaders. That's not what it says. Or you've got a load of rubbish managers, which I know is what everybody likes to blame the line manager for everything, don't they? I'm a bit of a line manager saviour on those things. I think they can only do the best they can within a rubbish system a lot of the time. But what we're not saying here is that theoretically they're not any good. What we're saying is that in the context of where you want your culture to go, the types of behaviours that you want to create as natural outcomes of people's experiences at work, your current system isn't particularly aligned. So this is an example of a live client that we worked with earlier in the year. Actually a really healthy organisation, one you can't tell from the scorecard, but one who has won awards around its employee experience and its connection to others, but one that's on a massive journey, that's trying to shift from a very stable organisation for the last 10 or 15 years into one that's moving into a high growth mode. So when we look at their existing cultural ecosystem, it's pointed towards stability, not rocking the boat, everybody having a kind of nice time and doing what they've always done on things. And what they actually want to do is build a much more innovative, improvement and growth oriented system, which means when we look at how the different parts of the system are driving towards it, they are just not fit for purpose for that longer term vision. But you can see here that in having it on one page, we can have that bigger conversation that's saying, this is what we're doing about the other parts of the system as the leaders of the change. This is what we're asking other people to do. Now let's have the conversation about what we need from you from a leadership tone and impact point of view to allow us to shift the dial around how your tone of leadership is supporting and creating the environment that we need to drive the behaviour that we require. So it allows you to really start to have the conversation around let me make you feel safe that this stuff is happening, but then let's shelve it and start to have a conversation about you as an agent of change and how we help you to move that forward. So this creates that sense of removal of smoke and allows you to continue to dashboard progress. So if your senior leaders are in a bit of an observational mode, if you're bringing this to them and the dashboard is starting to get amber and green in other areas, but their point isn't moving, it gives you that basis for continual challenge, continual shining of the lifting up of the mirror and shining the light on things to say, if you want this to work, this bit needs to start going amber and green as well. So I use this as a point of focus, contracting, but then also ongoing accountability that allows us to show execs how the consequences of their choices and actions are massively important as well. And the nice thing about this is that it is short, it is sharp, it lends very well to that kind of senior leader mindset of, let me have a look at this, and it gives you a framework to go deep into some areas. But if you do go in deep somewhere because they want to talk about something, you've always got that point to come back and go, yeah, that is important, but that's happening in the context of all of this stuff. And let's come back to having that conversation about how we contract with you in terms of moving things forward. Makes sense to people? Oh, good, Deborah. Agree. I like straightforward and powerful. My brain hasn't got the capacity to do anything more than that. So I'm glad it feels like that for you as well. So the more that you can dashboard, the more that you can create that sense of parity of information. Storytelling is important, but it creates smoke. So we've got to create an anchor for those stories, something that we can pull people back to and talk about. And the other thing that I think is massively important in here is that we can talk to leaders about the cascade and their influence across the other areas. So we think about how managers, for example, how they behave, how they do their operational planning, how they deliver on kind of enabling other people to succeed. That only happens if their manager, the leaders, are setting a clear standard for them to behave in the way that the business needs them to. They're providing the opportunity for those people to do it, but also they're holding them accountable over time. So not only are we talking about from an HR point of view, what we might be doing from a capability build or a people process reorientation point of view, we're also starting to have that conversation with leaders about the fact that actually they are the people who are making the ultimate decisions on the high level budget, which defines our resourcing model, which is a massive part of how it feels around here. They are the people who are accepting those papers into the SLT or the exec meeting and making the decisions when it's not appropriate for them to. So they're actually sending some really strong messages out about where delegated authority sits around things. They're the people who are deciding on the tone of the governance and reporting that's happening. They're the people who are either encouraging risk and kind of feeling fast and learning from things, or they're not making that safe in their response to those things. So we can explore and use this tool to have a conversation about leadership impact and shadow across all of these areas to make sure then when we're agreeing some of the elements within their own particular area, we're helping them consider the tone that they need to use. The only other thing that I would point out within this is you'll notice in there that as well as including system and process, which for me is massively important because that is the chains that bind a lot of people, we can ask them, and I think a lot of the time in culture change, we ask them just to push past the prevalent norms, the prevalent systems and processes to drive the culture forward. Recognizing and getting our execs on board around starting to retool and driving some quick wins about the chains that bind people and creating systems and processes that enable the new behavior is important. And often actually that can be a really good way to drive a quick win. So one of the things that I will do very quickly with execs, particularly in areas where accountability is a challenge, is support them to have a look at what decisions they're making in that senior leadership forum and encourage them to think about, well, what's the journey to getting people to a place where they're making those decisions themselves. So what do they reject? What do they take but coach on? And what do they, what do they continue to hold? So supporting them to start to make some really tangible shifts that isn't just about, I'm terrified that I need to be a whole other person around this, suddenly helps them to see that this isn't about us all trying to create sunshine and rainbows. It's about us ever so slightly shifting the way in which we do business, the choices that we make about our business, and the infrastructure and processes that we put in place that will naturally create an environment that allow people to behave in a fundamentally different way and pull out the behaviours that we need to move forward. So make this, yes, accountability on a page, but what this also allows us to do is start to identify tangible opportunities in the way that we go about business that will fundamentally shift those expectations, those beliefs about work, and allow people to display different behaviours. It's easy when I say it like that, isn't it? So let's talk a bit about releasing the constraints on things. So one of the things that I notice a lot whenever I see businesses, so we seem to get called in quite regularly for businesses after they've done their first stage of their culture inquiry. So they know their as is and their to be, and then they think, oh, right, well, we totally know that we're directive and we want to be. I'm obsessed with directive empowering today, aren't I? Always am, but we know we're massively directive at the moment and we want to get to a place of being an empowering and enabling culture. And then they're like, oh, well, we've described those things beautifully, but what do we actually need to shift around that? And often we get involved where a very strong fear or overwhelm reaction is happening, because typically in that shift from as is to be, the inquiries are typically focusing more on what is it that we need to fix, and it feels like a massive hill to climb. So here's the 942 things that people are doing that are annoying or unhelpful or frustrating, and we don't know how to fix them because our system is so smoky and just too complex. And I think when you're thinking about senior leaders, typically they've been successful within their career and they've pushed through to more senior roles because some of them, the transformation leads, sure, love a bit of fixing around things, but most of them are dreamers. What they're doing is looking to the future, thinking about what they could create and going for big goals. So that's what brings people often into senior leadership roles. So when we approach them with a fixed mentality, where we're trying to create that burning platform and show them the pain within the current situation, it just creates fatigue and overwhelm for them. And that's not how they're talking to shareholders. That isn't how they're talking to regulators about things, unless things have really hit the fan on stuff. They're focusing more on selling the vision, sharing that big piece about where we're going and what it is we're looking to achieve. So when you're doing that piece of work around gap analysis and opportunity, what I'd encourage you is that you focus more on a build mentality over a fixed mentality. Now, that doesn't mean glossing over the edges, but it's thinking about what's the core message that you want to give here. So focus to the future, sell people on the big goal. What does this mean? When we get here, when we succeed with this, what will it look like? How will people be behaving? How will that be fueling the business? And how does that link to our overall mission and the goals that we've set ourselves for the next few years? How does that help us overcome some of those environmental challenges or market issues that we're feeling at the moment, or we're fearful are coming around things? How does that help us respond to the terror that is AI that's coming to scourge us on things? I don't mean that, Amy. I've seen your new role coming in. It's AI's brilliant. It's all right. but I think there is a thing here about recognizing that actually selling the future is much more interesting and exciting for people, and it stops them activating their fear response, which could get them into that fight, flight or freeze position, which just isn't helpful at all, and allows them to be much more in that lovely prefrontal cortex space that allows them to come with you and dream and consider what their role might be in building this thing, rather than immediately thinking about their role of trying to get Barbara not to go home at 2:30 every day when she's been used to doing that for the last 42 years, and everybody will be mad that you've made her cry because she likes to walk her dog at that time, or whatever it may be. Probably tell I've been working with quite a few cozy organizations recently, but we've got to help people in the early stages get excited about this, see what their role, see what the possibilities are and how this thing's going to serve them. And while that fixed mentality feels enticing because that's where people will be, if you want to feel refreshing and you want to catch people's attention and feel like a true partner, using the build approach can be much more helpful. So just think about positioning and what it is you're selling, and have you got a dream that you want people to sign up to? And I think as part of that, if we want people to dream, we've got to get them to come with us and think that these dreams are actually possible, which means really supporting them to have a look at some of those challenges that might be really holding them back and feel pretty systemic. So very early on, what we do is work directly one-to-one with senior leaders to talk to them about their readiness and their interest in driving change forward. And typically what we're doing in those first conversations is starting to map and understand and help them make progress around some of these systemic constraints. So it may be that their relationship with their manager is problematic. Maybe they're totally on board with the change, but actually they know that the MD isn't really interested in this stuff, and that maybe they're not going to follow through. So supporting them to think about their role in influencing and engaging and really being part of your team to drive that forward, being part of the tribe, can be helpful. They can be caught in routines and rituals that they're stuck in. So, again, I'm working with an organisation at the moment, helping them reset the cadence and the focus of their executive team meetings, because they're really caught in the moment in leadership by decision-making paper, and they're just reviewing business paper over business paper and not actually able to either connect with each other or talk about the bigger challenges and opportunities that could drive the business forward. So we're reviewing the purpose of those meetings, the cadence of those meetings, to free them up the time and opportunity to operate in a different way. We look at relationship with peers, consider where we might be able to do team building and repair. But sometimes we're just talking about how do you mitigate risk and manage around those relationships to make things happen. Relationship with teams is critical. I'll talk to you a bit more about that in the moment. But also this piece I talked about earlier in terms of standard processes and systems. Where do we need to look at things that are funneling us into the old behaviour and the old way of working and start to influence those in a slightly different way? So in supporting, we kind of quietly map this and then use those coaching conversations to help people make progress towards them. But what we're also doing is a bit of an evaluation in terms of opportunity for change for those exec leaders and supporting them to do a bit of a review on that. If needed, we'll bring them together as a group and bring the mapping that we've done from those individual conversations to say, this is why you're stuck and what is it that we're going to do about that to move it forward. So understanding those constraints and supporting around them, I think, is massively important. I'll just talk a little bit about teams, because I think that is massively important to consider. So one of the things that we do, pretty standard actually, whenever we're supporting a cultural activation, is start with what we call a role contracting cascade. So basically, one of the things that we notice a lot in organisations is that people are not necessarily fulfilling their full role and their full mode, particularly in that context where I was talking about, where an exec team might be caught in that leadership by business paper mode, where what they're actually probably doing is doing a lot of the operational leadership or a lot of the tactical kind of decision making on a day-to-day basis on things, and not necessarily really focusing more strategically on stuff. Or there's just a chunk of behavioural habits which are really unhelpful in the new context. They might have worked perfectly well in the old world, but they just don't work in the new context, or they won't work. They'll hold the new context back. So basically what we do is support with a cascade that asks the chief executive or the MD to say, if I'm a leader of this organisation that we're going to be moving forward, what is it that I need to focus on? How is it that I need to behave? And where do I need to be kind of driving my most positive impact on a day-to-day basis? And in supporting them to do that work, invariably there's stuff that needs to shift, whether that's relationship dynamics with their direct reports as individuals or a team, or actually there might be some work that they're doing on a day-to-day basis that should sit somewhere else. So we encourage them to do that recontracting conversation with their own direct reports, which creates that need for them to do the same. Work just starts to shift, or behavioural tone starts to shift around things. So very much what we're encouraging is that fostering of very clear and conscious conversations about how is it that we behave around here? What is my expectation of you as your leader or your manager? and what is it that you need from me to be able to take that journey. So that recontracting isn't about a single line in the sand that's saying from today onwards, this needs to be different forever. What we're actually doing is saying, look, there's a lot of change that needs to happen. So the ideal is that within the next 6 to 12 months, this is where you need to be in the context of your role. Now, what is it? What's the plan that we're putting in place to get you there? And how do we review and keep ourselves accountable around it? So we're using the management infrastructure to, rather than kind of values activation or behavioural workshops, which are all very conceptual and HR led, we're using the management structure to reset the expectation from a task and a behaviour point of view to allow things to move forward. Now, that is really, really critical to creating legitimacy and a business focus on this. Otherwise, what we're really doing is just putting the icing on the cake. You know, we're not going to change the flavour of what's inside. We're just trying to kind of put the covering on and hope that some of that behaviour and flavour seeps in. So considering how we use role contracting can be helpful for a couple of reasons. Legitimises it, it makes it a business management challenge and opportunity. It gives leaders somewhere to go. So if they feel constrained by their team and they don't really know what to do, then it supports them to start to have conversations. But within there, what we're typically doing as well is supporting the HRBP teams to really partner with their leaders to look at those talent plans and consider, have these people got what we need in the new world? Can we develop them to where they need to go? Are we making sure that the central development work that we're doing around this programme, or more generally through our people strategy, is that aligned to the role contracting work that's happening? Or are we supporting these leaders to manage these people if we need to out of the organisation and start to think about how we bring in new talent that's aligned better to our new world? So it allows the conversation about tone and type of behaviour to really be mainstreamed and looked at in a really constructive way. So role contracting is really helpful, and it allows us to really put that shot across the bows with our exec that is saying, this is a how we do business thing. This isn't a we do some workshops and hopefully people find a way through and try to do, you know, find some new behaviours and stick at them over time type of thing. And then the last thing to say around this is just this piece around, let's support the human. Let's recognise that actually there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of pressures. There's a lot of priorities within change. So recognising how difficult behaviour change is, I think, is really important. So for those of you who maybe attended the Readiness to Change workshop, you'll remember me talking about this. But we've got to remember that even as individuals, the path to shifting our behaviours is really challenging. You know, our brain is set up to do what it's always done. It's set up for us to demonstrate behaviours that have got us food, kept us safe over time. So if we're working within an organisational environment where we've been able to, we might not even thrive, but we've been able to carry on and be successful and not get in too much trouble or cause too many waves, if somebody's suddenly asking us to act in a different way, we're basically asking them to go from the lovely, easy path well travelled, which we know what the reaction and impact will be, that will keep us safe, into climbing up a new hill that really won't support, you know, we're not sure where it's going to go. It feels hard, it feels difficult. And from a neuroscience point of view, we're literally creating new neural pathways around that information, which are a bit weak and a bit rubbish whenever we start it. And we've got this lovely, easy neural pathway over here that our brain knows is easy to flash some stuff down and knows what happens. So there's a huge amount of conscious effort, conscious energy, and having to overcome our own fears and our own natural instinct to do what we've always done to drive this forward. So we've got to make sure that we don't just expect our execs to be robots who can immediately flip. In our change, we've got to give them the space to explore this from an individual and a team point of view, and we've got to think about where their fears might be around things. Our change framework might help you with this. So there is a download on our website, and we've also got a free tool on this. Gosh, I don't know when I create all this stuff, but clearly I like to share it. But we use this change framework to really evaluate change readiness on an individual and organisational point of view, and we monitor it over time to see what progress we're making around the change. We've got some metrics that allow us to do that. But considering how you foster great awareness within your context, so that belief. I guess it's about the general recognition of the need to change. So working with your exec team members to build that understanding and support them, as I said, to consider that from the build as well as the fixed mindset can be helpful, because sometimes if you're doing it from a fixed mindset, it's just like, oh, it's just easier to do it myself, isn't it? Because I'm never going to fix that. If we do it from a build mindset, it's like, yeah, but look at that juicy peach that's over there that if I just keep going, I might get to. There's an incentivization for the discomfort that is a bit different that can be helpful to support people. Supporting them with this mindset piece is massively important. So getting them to understand their own role and change, what they can do, what the options are for action. A lot of the time when I meet senior leadership teams, particularly where we might be stepping in on a change that's starting to falter, there's a huge amount of frustration that they aren't doing what they need to do. But when you dig into it, they don't necessarily know what to do. They're a bit scared that they might say the wrong thing, or they might not say it quite right, so they don't want to do any comms, or they're worried about what's happening from a central point of view. So should I be talking to my team about this yet? And if I do talk to them, how does that change things moving forward? So thinking about that piece around, well, how do we give them a clear path to playing a role, being able to engage? What does that look like for them? We do like an activity map that really puts them at the helm of localized engagement through their own business areas and formalizes their role around comms, role contracting and system and process review within their own business areas. So really defining that for them so they understand what role they can play, I think is important. And the scorecard helps you with that to drive that forward. Thinking about that bit around capability, I think is massive, particularly around confidence. I think a lot of the time they may have the skills and tools, they may not, but they might have the skills and tools to act, but they just might not have the confidence. So again, we use coaching and routine partnership with execs to really support them, where typically on our larger programs, we'll have a monthly check-in with each of the exec team, which just checking where their business area is, how they feel things are going, where their kind of constraint map is and what that's doing for them, and supporting them to just boost them, either supporting them to get the right skills and tools that they need, or just giving them that little bit of energy and confidence boost that they need around stuff. And the last thing I would say is opportunity to act is massively important as well. So making sure that there is that full flow of accountability and understanding of this through your leadership structure. So even though it often feels like our execs are the top of the tree, your MD or your chief executive is going to be massively important in this. If they don't believe in it, if they're not willing to shift, they will not hold their people to account, or they might shift them back into old behaviours. But similarly, if you have something that sits above you, what's your non-exec board doing? What are the conversations that are being had in? What is it that your broader governance structures are encouraging? And have you created the education and the support that you need to make sure that they're creating the opportunities, the support and the accountability for that to drive through appropriately? So thinking about the execs ecosystem in the same way as we do the masters ecosystem to drive change forward is important. And I think it's not something that we always do, because we just assume we're used to them being in charge, particularly, you know, when they've thought about something, they just flip and they do it, don't they? So we expect them to display the same behaviour for us, but actually recognising that they're probably on a journey with culture and stakeholdering with them more closely and partnering with them more closely can be really helpful. Okay, so that's all the things I've ever thought about engaging exec. It's probably not even half of them, but you know, it's a starter for 10 in 55 minutes. So I'm open to any questions. If anybody's got any, really happy to talk about them. While we talk about it, I'll just leave this here for you in case anybody's interested. Got early access for you guys for our Culture Changemaker Accelerator, which is our deep dive 6 weeks course, which goes through our change methodology, shares all of those tools in broader detail with you. So we'll be sending an email out later on today for early sign up if anybody's interested in it at all. But there's the details there for having a look at it, the booking link, and getting some more information if you want it. But we've got a couple of minutes. If anybody's got any questions, I'm really happy to have a chat. What's your thoughts? Any thoughts, comments, observations? Stunned silence, that seems to be my normal. Deborah, go ahead.
Paula, have you ever had experience with an organisation where half the exec board are really conscious of this work and trying to do the best, and the other half just don't want to know? How did you go about trying to change that mindset?
Oh, that's a beautiful question, Deborah. I think that's, yeah, loads that happens. For me, change is less about trying to flip everyone, and it's more about making the old behavior the out-group behavior. So typically if we have so two things. One is looking at the resistance and looking at readiness to see if there's anything that is missing through that readiness profile, to see if we're just missing an easy trick to pull people into our camp. But if we've done everything we can and there is still a chunk of people who aren't coming with us for some reason, then for me it's about a process of outgrouping, if I'm completely honest. So bolstering the behaviours within those who get it, creating the opportunities for them to build, gain traction and build organically over time, but then basically removing the power from those who don't get it, if that makes sense. And I don't mean that in as Machiavellian way as I'm saying it. I just mean in terms of stop responding to the derailing behaviours on stuff, stay focused on what it is that you're trying to achieve, reward, encourage, support the behaviours that are in line with the new culture, manage through the behaviours that aren't, and just remove the power from them by not responding to them or getting distracted by them, really. Thank you. Suzanne, go ahead.
That's a fab session, by the way, Paula. Thank you for that. Loads of tools. But I was just curious on a lot of my execs, they want me to do a culture change over a project. So you kind of mentioned AI there at a certain point, and we've got a particularly large AI project. Would you suggest that you kind of home in on the project area, or actually you can't really make that cultural change until you take the whole kind of business as a whole? Is that what your kind of main thoughts are, to go more down on that avenue? And how do you kind of overcome a business that just want to kind of create a slight bit of culture change because of a project?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one, isn't it? I'm a massive opportunist about this sort of thing, but a really honest contractor on it. So I think you can start culture change through a project, but you will never deliver a culture change. The role that it will have from that project point of view is it might create a case study or a Trojan horse for you, which starts to demonstrate to the business that things can be different and what results that brings. But the truth of it is, from a contracting point of view, is they're still operating in an old system. So if the behavior that you're looking for is significantly different and counter to the overall culture, that project will still be at the mercy of that. And the risk that you've got is then that effect dies away. But the bigger risk is actually that you elevate those people and they get into this weird kind of aren't we the best status, or they get really peed off with the existing culture because they've tasted something else and the ripples are unhelpful. So I think you've got to show, well, this is what it could do, but in these conditions, this is how the teams that are working into that project need to plug into it, or these are the risks that it will create around it. So it can be helpful to start the conversation, but it's definitely not the long-term solution to driving culture change. It's just, it can be a domino to get things started, really.
Okay, lovely, thank you.
That's all right. Lovely. Well, it's 11 o'clock. I imagine everybody's next meeting is calling them. It's lovely to see you all. Thank you so much for joining us. We will share the recording. I'll send out the link to the EX index as well, so you've got that. Please just stick it in front of all of your execs and have a chat with them as you wish. And yeah, I really appreciate it. If anybody feels that it was a great session, we live on exposure on these things, so if you would share on social media and stuff, we'd really appreciate it, whatever you feel comfortable with. But it's lovely to see you all. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.